Our past inquiries resumed. Mr. White gone missing, or he's on his way?
Sorry.
It's okay. It was, yes. It's okay. Thank you. Would you like to continue?
Thank you
Mr.
very much,
Bird?
Madam. Can turn the issue of green belt, grey belt, if we could.
Okay.
The promised guidance on identifying grey belt land has yet to be published, as a matter of fact.
There is guidance we're expecting. Obviously, we have a definition in the back of the MPPF, as you know, but yeah, there's more to come.
Good. And as far as your Appendix I is concerned, that has no formal status as a methodology, does it?
No.
And as far as openness, as we've already agreed, is concerned, that involves consideration not just of the spatial effect of development, but also the visual effect.
Yes.
And that includes consideration not just of built form, but also general activity.
Yes.
And in terms of the greenbelt purposes, deal first with the issue of unrestricted sprawl.
Okay.
We take up your Appendix I2, just briefly. You've set out a quotation from the judgment of Mr. Justice Sales in the Turner case at Appendix I, page 1, haven't you? Madam, yes, the quotation starts at the big on the bottom of I1, but runs into I2, and it's I2 I wanted to ask about, because in the middle of the paragraph on the top of I2, there's
I2.2.
it's actually I2.2 openness,
Yeah.
page I1 runs over to I2.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you about that part of the quotation at the top of I2. And in the middle of that paragraph is a sentence which starts greenness. Greenness is a visual quality. Do you see that? About 6 lines down.
Yep.
Greenness is a visual quality. Part of the idea of the green belt is that the eye and spirit should be relieved from the prospect of unrelenting urban sprawl.
Yes.
That's relevant, isn't it, to the first of the green belt purposes, unrestricted sprawl.
Yeah, it's trying to define how sprawl is perceived.
Yeah. And the fact that development can be built up to a different boundary feature to that which presently exists does not mean that development is not sprawled, does it?
No, that's not correct, because sprawl is by its very nature unrestricted. So, and that's exactly what the function is. It is to control unrestricted sprawl. Sprawl is unmanaged, uncontrolled,
Well,
spread from the settlement edge.
what purpose or value would the first purpose of Greenbelt have if that were right? Mr. Smith, you could always find a boundary to build up to.
Well, that's not,
For example,
forgive me, that's not the case. I've been involved on many sites where there is no boundary.
well, so you say that the site may not have a boundary. The point I'm putting to you, if you don't have sprawl because you built up to a new boundary, then purpose A would have no function, because there would always be somewhere you could build up to in terms of a hard boundary.
And forgive me, Mr. Bird, what I'm saying is that there are plenty of cases where there is no fallback boundary. There is nothing else. Plenty of cases. And therefore, this is quite unusual in that it does have clear physical boundaries.
Well, forgive me, there will always be another boundary at some distance from a site which you could build up to.
On
your evidence, that would not be
scale.
on your approach, that would not be sprawl, as I understand it.
If there is a boundary, which, and this, in this particular case, we are trying to judge the effect of this site on the greenbelt purposes. And we have got boundaries close to the edges of this site. So it's not just, putative boundaries a long way away. we have got boundaries close to the edges of this site which are physical and clear and permanent, and therefore they would restrict sprawl. Do all greenbelt parcels on the edge of settlements have such boundaries? No, definitely not.
Okay, so your focus is on the parcel itself. We can also agree this much, can't we, that the fact that there is an existing strong physical boundary doesn't mean that the adjoining greenbelt land, i.e. adjoining that boundary, performs no function in restricting sprawl, does it?
The A404, I think you're referring to, is a very clear boundary. However, one of the problems with it is that development has jumped it. So we've got things like, obviously, Westhorpe House, we've got Westhorpe Park, we've got the Crown Plaza. These are quite noticeable areas of built form which have jumped that boundary, and that obviously diminishes the effectiveness of the boundary. So the road itself is a clear boundary,
Right.
but the land beyond the road is less open, and therefore the boundary becomes slightly
Right.
less effective. One of the benefits of the boundary that I'm proposing is the land beyond is much more open, and therefore not only is the boundary effective, but the land beyond is also open green
It's
belt.
better to form a judgment on that.
Of course.
But the point I'm putting to you, which I think you agree, is that land beyond a firm boundary, which is in the green belt, does, leave aside the specifics of this site, does also contribute to preventing unrestricted sprawl. It's not just the boundary itself. You have
That's
regard to the good. And as with openness, sprawl has a visual stroke perception aspect, doesn't it?
It does.
Good. And we've already touched on the various urban influences. I'm not going to rehearse those in terms of the greenbelt topic, but just in terms of noise, that of itself gives rise to no perception of sprawl, does it, in a physical sense?
Not in a physical sense, but it is a sign of activity, and it is associated to some extent with urban influence.
Equally, in terms of lighting, that doesn't have any effect on the openness of the site, does it?
I think it is a sign of activity, and again, it therefore confers some urban characteristics on the site. It slightly diminishes. It's not the same as having buildings across the site, of course, but it is a definite sign of urban activity.
Again, we can leave. The inspector is going to do a nighttime visit in due course. And as far as the Crown Plaza is concerned, which I think you refer to in paragraph 517 of your proof, that has no material effect on the open character of the site itself at all, does it?
No, it doesn't really. It's not particularly, you can see it, but only glimpsed from the site in a few locations. It's more, I think, when you start talking about, as I said, if you start talking about the parcel that I was trying to define with the railway line, Westhorpe Farm Lane and the A4155, that's where obviously Crown Plaza comes into play in particular, because it's in that sector.
Yes, but as far as the character of the site is concerned, we're agreeing.
Yeah,
that's
it doesn't
no
have a
material.
massive influence on the
That-
actual site. I accept
Helpful,
that.
good. Then in terms of, go back to your appendix I, please. And in terms of coalescence, you identified what you regard as a strongly performing parcel. Can we agree this much, that unless the site in question is the only residual element of an existing gap and there are no views of any built development, your test could never be satisfied, could it? Yeah. Unless the site is the only residual element of the existing gap and there are no built or no views of built development, your test could never be satisfied.
No, it absolutely can, and it often is.
Well, look at your test.
Sorry.
look at your test on page I2. A strongly performing parcel of land would be the only space between two settlements, would be open and free from built development with no perception of built development available from publicly accessible points.
Well, I think the key point there is there are many parcels which are the only space between two settlements. I don't think it's an,
With no perception of built development.
well, I think, to be honest with you, just to interpret that for you, I would say that if it's the only space between two settlements, that would be sufficient to make it strongly performing. I think that's what I'm intending by that. I'm sorry if that's not clear.
No, well, it wasn't. So that's why I'm asking you about it,
Good.
because it's entirely typical for built development to be visible from either side of a gap, isn't it? Is where you
is.
have a gap.
Yeah,
And
it
that's
is.
why the gap is important very often.
Yeah, it is. But it's absolutely fine. You can still have an effective gap if you can see built form, as long as you can see the space in the gap.
Yes, but can't be right that any size of gap would be sufficient,
Well,
or is it, in your view?
well, not just my view. I mean, I've given evidence on strategic gaps and coalescence at a lot of inquiries, and I have to say that there's a lot of tests for how big a gap has to be. Size is not the only criterion. Obviously, there's the nature of the
Yeah.
edges and what happens in character terms between the two edges.
But I don't understand you to say there has to be actual coalescence. Perception of coalescence can be enough, and avoidance of the perception of coalescence can be enough for land to perform strongly in greenbelt terms, can't it?
Yeah, but the perception of coalescence, you know, you can actually have relatively close settlement edges. In my experience, you can have settlement edges 200 meters apart that still have a very effective separation. In fact, you've only got to look around most English towns and villages to see that there are a lot of settlements that are about that distance apart.
I'll leave that to judgment of submissions in due course. As far as your criteria are concerned, they're not arithmetic, are they? They require judgment.
Correct.
And if we go back to I4, page I4,
Yes, I have that.
want to be quite sure in terms of boundaries, which is the third of the bullet points in the first box to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built up areas.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We've got there are there clear boundary features. You there rely on Westhorpe Farm Lane, as I understand it. Is that right?
That's part
Yes.
of the boundary.
And on the southern boundary of the site,
not the site, railway line to the south.
so you don't rely on a site here. You rely on another boundary off-site.
Which is relatively close to it.
Yeah.
Yes. As I say, it's logical because that then encapsulates Westhorpe Park, Crown Plaza, Westhorpe House, other fragments of, for example, residential development, as well as obviously the landfills on site.
And in terms of the connection to the wider greenbelt, which is your fourth criterion, as I understand it, you take the view that the A4155 and Westhorpe Farm Lane effectively disconnect the site from the wider greenbelt.
Yeah, I think to some extent they do, yes.
So the inspector can form a judgment in relation to that. And as far as influences of urban built form, we've already dealt with that under the character issue and the landscape, but I've got nothing to ask you further on that. As far as purpose 2 is concerned, and criterion 2, here you've specified non-greenbelt settlements, as I understand it.
Where are you looking, sorry?
In the first bullet point on page I4 under purpose 2, is the parcel in a narrow gap between non-greenbelt settlement.
Yeah, so settlements outside the greenbelt, yes.
Yes, so for example, where the purpose is to prevent coalescence of larger settlement, to allow one of the large settlements to join up with a non-greenbelt settlement might leave almost no gap, but that would not lead to your test being met, would it?
That's true, and it's the right way to do it in greenbelt terms. I'll be honest with you, I'm slightly more picky than that. I would include settlements that are washed over as well, because I think that certainly from a character point of view as a landscape architect, that's an issue. And generally speaking, the function of greenbelt, I would say, is to prevent coalescence. So I'm a little more selective than that in
I'd say
practice.
that you wouldn't apply that criterion in that way,
I would apply it more stringently.
right?
So I would apply it to Little Marlow, for example.
And in terms of the second criterion, is the development a wider gap where there is some scope development without undermining greenbelt function? That would also embrace appropriate development, wouldn't it? So where there is any scope for appropriate development, this test would be effectively met.
Yeah, I'm not with you. I'm sorry.
Well, you've said here effectively, is the development in a wider gap where there is some scope for development without undermining greenbelt function?
Yes.
If there is, it's more likely to be grey belt, as I understand it, on your view.
Well, it just means that there is that parcel is performing less of a function in preventing coalescence. There is potentially, as is the case in this site, part of a gap between settlements that could be sacrificed without losing the function of separating settlements. If that is the case, then that means that that parcel is less functional.
Yes, but I mean, development, for example, may have no impact on openness, but would still be, as it were, as far as your criterion here, would still, your criterion here would still apply, wouldn't it? So it might be a development of an entirely open character which requires planning permission, but effectively your criterion would apply, given the way it's expressed.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Okay, then in terms of the effect on openness, if we could just go to your Appendix E, please, and D6. Which is table E3.
Yes.
Would it be fair for the inspector to use your judgments as to the magnitude effect either of the gently sloping ruderal areas on D6 or the largely simple but with some diversity from adjacent built form on D7 as substantial as being a proxy for the effect on the openness of the greenbelt?
It would be a proxy for the openness of the greenbelt in the site.
Yeah. Helpful. And if we go to your proof, please, at paragraph 520, page 85.
Yes, I have that.
You say that the development would have no significant effects upon the openness of the landscape to the north, east and south of the site.
Yes.
Do you say that the Marlow International development has a significant effect on the openness of the appeal site?
No, I haven't said that, in fairness. I've said it has an influence on the site. But in fairness, if you look at the way I've done the assessment, I've said, look, first of all, it doesn't have many buildings on the site. And we did I think you asked me, one of the first questions in this session was, is the site broadly open? I said, well, yes, it is broadly open, yes.
Yeah.
But there are influences
Yes, I just
From-
want, sorry,
from buildings and noise and light
Yeah.
and so on and so forth.
I just wanted to gauge to what extent you say the Marlow International has an effect, and you say that's not significant.
No, it's not significant, no, but it's definitely has an effect.
Okay, then in terms of sprawl, as far as Westhorpe Farm Lane is concerned, and I think you described the boundary as being a prominent boundary, don't you?
Do I say prominent? It's certainly
Yeah.
clear.
Clear. Okay, in terms of the clarity of the boundary, that's visible exclusively in the vicinity of Westhorpe Lane itself, isn't it?
Well, to be clear, yes, Westhorpe Farm Lane is largely visible on the lane itself. But as you correctly said a little moment or so ago, it's a combination of the boundary itself and also the landscape on either side of that boundary. And obviously we've got a site which I say is in poor condition. We have a boundary that, in fairness, is marked not just by the road, but by a relatively prominent conifer boundary, which actually can be seen from a little distance away, just to the east of that lane. And then obviously we've got a slight change in character. There are fewer buildings, less noise, less light to the east. There is the Marlow Athletics track, Little Marlow Athletics complex, but generally speaking, it is more open and rural on that side. So it's that combination of elements that makes that I think, an effective boundary.
Again, well, the inspector can judge, and Mr. Fannin will address it in due course as well. And just in terms of your scoring, in terms of the Greenbelt purpose and urban sprawl in particular, that is also influenced by your judgment as to the effect of the A4155 in terms of the separation which you argue for from the remaining Greenbelt.
It is an element. I don't think it's a key element for me. The key elements for me are obviously the nature of the site and its openness, and the fact that that differs from the landscape to the north, east and south, the nature of the boundaries. Those are the key factors for me. The degree, 630 metres, it's common ground between myself and Mr. Kennett, between the eastern edge of the site and the western edge of Little Marlow. He obviously has agreed in cross-examination that there'd be no actual or perceived coalescence. So these are all the factors I would suggest that are for the inspector to consider.
I appreciate that. I was asking about sprawl coalescence in terms of the factual position, in terms of the gap and the percentage of the gap. That's all agreed. I don't need to trespass on that.
Yeah.
And as I understand it, your score of 1 out of 5 assumes that what would be left of parcel 60 would continue to provide a large open area of rural land and clear separation. That's effectively your judgment.
That's correct.
Yeah. And in terms of the perception of Marlow moving significantly closer to Little Marlow, Mr. Kennett did also refer to viewpoint 5, didn't he, in the view?
He did.
Viewpoint 5.
Yeah.
Again, it would be fair to say there that there is a perception of the two joining, isn't there?
I don't think so. No, do you want to turn that up so
Yes,
we can talk
quite
about it?
happy to turn that up. Probably use your appendice.
They certainly come closer. That's a fact.
It's a viewpoint 5, madam. Going to look in Mr. Smith's appendices. P5, madam, yeah. So we've got the existing with P5, Little Marlow to the bottom and left.
So, Mr. Bird, this is a view we obviously looked at on site, and I was kind of guessing this might crop up. And you remember I mentioned to you on site about Winchbottom. And that's obviously that little hamlet on the left-hand side of the view. Sorry, Mr. Bird, ask your question.
No, that just in terms of the effect, in terms of the development, it does appear to join up with Little Marlow, doesn't it, in that viewpoint?
I don't think it does. When you look at it on the ground, and I've taken this photograph and I've looked at this, there is a clear woodland belt between the two, very different nature of edges in Winchbottom and the proposed development. They're on very different planes of the view. So when you're actually there in the flesh on the ground, there is, yes, I accept, one is in the middle ground slightly further forward than the other, but they are on very clearly on different planes and separated by woodland. So to me, it is clearly understandable that they are separate entities.
Okay, but again, inspector's been there and can form that
Absolutely. Yep.
judgment in the light.
It's a good opportunity for me to explain
No,
my
that's fine.
perspective.
That's what you're there for. Very helpful. Just in terms of the land to the east, so east of the appeal side, what score would you attribute to that land in terms of coalescence and avoiding coalescence?
So if we went from Westhorpe Farm Lane to the western
Little
edge
Marlow.
of Little Marlow, I would say it would certainly be let's assume, are we assuming that our site's developed?
Yes.
Or not?
I assume it's developed. but
It's
what's-
built out.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it would then be probably 4 or 5.
Right. And in terms of encroachment, again, I don't trespass on judgments, but just again, same question in relation to the land to the east with the development built out. What score would you attribute that
For what, sorry?
in terms of Greenbelt Purpose 3 encroachment on the countryside? What score would
Encroachment.
you?
Oh,
attach
if
to
you
the
were,
land
if
to
ours
the
was
east
built
of the
out,
appeal?
I would say that would be, again, probably if you exclude the sewage treatment works, if you just had it running just to the south of footpath 21, for example, you've obviously got the athletics track. Forgive me, this is not an assessment I've done, so I'm doing this on the
Yeah.
hoof.
That's fine.
Still largely rural, I'd say 4.
Right.
Probably going to get shot by my team for doing this on the hoof, but there we go.
Yeah.
In
And in terms of the Arab's parcel 60 assessment, did you actually dispute their findings for the larger parcel 60?
I'm going to have to turn that up, just bear with me. I'm actually looking for it in my proof because I've got a sort of a summary. So that's
Section 5, it's in section 5.
thank you.
And you've got it on page 82, you've got these extract.
Yes. I think on my scoring, I would end up with slightly different scores
Right.
because certainly coalescence, I would suggest that there's a chance that parcel 60 can be subdivided and therefore it shouldn't be, because 60 just literally spans the entire gap. And obviously one of my criteria is there scope to subdivide that? Or is it one very discrete and clear parcel? And in that case, it's several parcels. So I don't think that should be the highest score.
Just so I know where you're coming from. That's helpful. Good, then I think the final question I have, which is not related to Greenbelt matters. You look at both, I think, Shepperton
Yes,
in terms of the effects by way of a comparison.
yes.
And in relation to your comparative assessment, in question I want to ask you is, what as a matter of fact do you understand in terms of a site search did the appellants undertake before identifying the appeal
I
site?
can't comment on
You
that.
can't comment, okay. Thank you very much, madam. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bird. Any interested parties who are objecting to the development would like to ask questions of Mr. Smith? My question's been answered. It's
Okay.
good. Mr. White, do you need 5 minutes or are you happy to re-examine now? Or 10 minutes in even?
We need 10 minutes now.
Well, 5, if you need some time, then.
No, ma'am, I'm very happy. Thank you very much. There'll be no re-examination. Thank you.
All right, okay, excellent. Right, then that moves me on to end of day adjournment. Ecology statement of common ground, any update?
I think it's just with the council for signing, Mr. Fannin. So we can provide an electronic version to Holly Dutton, or I don't know how quickly a hard copy can be provided to you before you leave today.
Ideally, yeah, just in case Holly's not around right now, you can get me a hard copy. Okay, thank you. I appreciate I haven't issued any agendas for tomorrow. I've done the noise one. I can send that out now. I haven't done ecology, so I'll do it first thing in the morning, or it will be with you first thing in the morning. There was a few things that cropped up this morning, just to pick up at some point, either in planning or was about the groundwater, like who's responsible for groundwater, that sort of, because I know there's often some confusion sometimes between whether it's LLFA or environment, different people, often groundwater is not really considered. So it's just where that's been considered in the rounds of everything, because it was brought up this morning.
When would you like that answered?
Just in planning,
along, or
yeah,
Mr.
just mock it.
Fannin or Mr. Sensible, or would you like us to come back tomorrow morning with an answer?
No, just pick it up at some point in the
Okay.
planning evidence.
So
was
we'll
just
put an
the-
inquiry note in, perhaps an agreed note on the issue. as
Yeah,
far as-
because I know that LLFA have no issues and Thames Water have said they've no issues, but obviously it's been raised about groundwater, and
Yeah.
I've done a couple of inquiries where groundwater, nobody seems to know who's in charge of that. So
We'll look at that.
just a note on that would be helpful. And then I think that's it for me.
Madam, just in terms of the ecology statement of common ground, I understand the council's ecologist is on leave today, so
Typically.
we'd like to sign it tomorrow morning, but we can certainly have it to you in draft this evening.
Can I have
You've
the,
got-
yeah,
you've got-
please, that would be really helpful. Thanks. Anything else to raise?
No, except should we just agree on the menu for tomorrow, just so there's no doubt? As I understand it, we're going to do the roundtable session, the noise session, and then have Julie cook at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And yes, okay, perfect.
That's the plan
That is the plan, and best laid plans. That is the
and all
plan.
that. Yeah, I think we all thought we'd finish a little bit earlier today than we have done, but anyway. Yes, Julie Cook, I anticipate, is going to be at some point, probably after the afternoon break, so maybe from 3, but we'll see how we go on the
Just-
roundtables.
Just to say, madam, it's not going to be an hour in cross-examination.
Okay.
I'd say much closer to half an hour, if that helps with time.
Yeah, that helps. Yeah.
Could I actually raise one other point, which is on Thursday, it's quite a heavy day, particularly, and this is no comment in Miss Nevin's absence, but Mr. Kershaw's time estimates at the moment, at the extreme, it's 4 hours, 15 minutes. So I've had a chat with my learned friend. My preference, I'm probably going to leave alternative sites and the weight to economic benefits to Mr. Fannon's kind of parent cross-examination. That would be my preference. And I've expressed that to Mr. Bird and he didn't, I mean, I'll let him say whether he agrees or disagrees, but I just wanted to plant the seed that that's the approach I would prefer to take. So obviously Thursday becomes principally about need, because as I say, there is quite a lot. So that would be my preferred approach, subject to what you and Mr. Bird's view is.
Mr. Bird,
We're very happy with that approach.
I only put economic benefits there for Mr. Fannon because I was conscious that he would be going after your economic benefits witness essentially. When he came to the stand to do planning, that was why I put his economic benefits bit in with the need bit so that he wasn't giving evidence after your witness. Giving evidence. That was what I was thinking, so it was fair.
I don't want Mr. Fannon to die of shock, but I'll be fair to him. I think it is inevitable, frankly, in the light of the evidence, it is inevitable in his examination in chief. He will need to address the planning balance in the light of the evidence he's heard and in the light of the 5 needs/economic benefits. And I would not object to that. That must be fair that you have his updated view in the light of the evidence.
Okay.
And I understand that the quid pro quo of that is that he must comment on it, but my preference therefore is to address the weight he gives in his final planning balance at the time he gives that in chief.
That makes sense. That's fine. I'm hoping Mr. Kershaw will not be 2 hours and 15 minutes, but I increased that time given he'd requested it. So I don't think I've ever sat through an examination in chief that's been 2 hours and 15 minutes. So I'm hoping it's not going to be that long, but we'll see tomorrow. No, we won't. We'll see that on Thursday.
Are we not seeing the Rule 6 party tomorrow either? Do you know?
No, I think they're in tomorrow because they're taking part in the roundtables, so we can have an update from Ms. Nevin.
And can Mr. Bird, Miss Nevin, and I and our wonderful juniors join you, say at 9:45 tomorrow morning outside the inquiry to discuss the site visit?
Site visits, yeah. Can we say 9:30? Just conscious
Of
that like
course.
9:45 means if we end up chatting for a bit longer than normal, we're running right up to 10 o'clock.
Yeah, we'll get a message to Miss Nevin.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. Okay, I think that's everything for tonight. Apart from the hard copy, but presume someone's going to printing it off. Thank you. Right, so I'll see you all in the morning. We're adjourned until 10 o'clock. Thank you.